The guest on this episode of Her Stories is Dr. Shailaja Valdiya, who is a former professor in social sciences and currently works as a freelance writer and a researcher. She will discuss many pertinent questions and share insights on the impact of the COVID-19 instigated crisis on higher education. According to her, the impact has been multidimensional. It could pose multiple challenges before the college administration and management, the faculty, and the students. How deeply the campus life has been affected, the possible loss of revenues for institutions, and its far reaching implications on the faculty members and other employees of the colleges. The new approaches to teaching, learning, and evaluation, and how the students and teachers are dealing with such transitions. These and other such concerns will be touched upon in a discussion with Dr. Shailaja Valdiya.
The impact of the COVID crisis has been far-reaching, and in each sector we can see experts grappling with the challenges that are coming up on a very dynamic basis. Nearly every day there is something to deal with, and we are not sure what is there in store for each one of us. In the sector of higher education, the university students are not sure how the year will look like for them. What is the university campus life going to be? How it has impacted the current state of researchers, and what kind of resources do they have at hand to work on some of the challenges that are coming before us. To talk about many of such aspects, I have with me Dr. Shailaja Valdiya, who is a professor in social sciences who formerly served at several universities, and now she is a researcher and a writer on a freelance basis. Hello, Dr. Shailaja Valdiya, and I'm so happy on Her Stories.
Thanks for having me on here. I'm glad to be here and offer my perspectives to you. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you, and I really look forward to some really useful insights from you. Dr. Valdiya, if I may have to ask you in a very general manner, that what is the impact of the COVID crisis on higher education? I know it's a very broad question, but what are some of your thoughts? Could I just get to hear those first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So you covered a fairly big part of it when you mentioned the uncertainty, right? I mean, that's one big thing that comes out of this whole COVID business. There's a lot of uncertainty for practically everyone involved. That's right from the high-level administration all the way down to the students. So there is, I suppose, at the college and institute level, there are concerns about how to manage the next few weeks, months, perhaps even years. We don't know what the timeline is on this. So there are concerns about how long the lockdown is going to be in effect, and whether the college campus should remain closed throughout, and how that situation will be handled. Whether the new semester should start on schedule as before, and whether there is a scope anytime in the near future to get regular campus activity back on schedule. So for administrators, there are all these uncertainties about timeline. Then there are concerns about funding and management. So especially for the smaller colleges, the more established colleges are a little better off because they have a lot of seed funding from research and other places. But the smaller private colleges, for instance, they tend a large part of their revenue comes from student fees and from boarding and lodging and so on. Now with campuses being emptied, a large part of that revenue goes. So there's also concerns about where the money is going to come from, where the continuing educational activities, how those will be handled. That's another part of the uncertainty. And then there is concerns about how to handle the payment of staff, faculty, and so on. Faculty also are concerned about their positions. The most senior faculty, of course, have more established positions. Many of them are either tenured faculty or tenure track. So they have a little more job security. But the more temporary staff, for instance, adjunct professors who teach part-time or temporarily, they have more insecure positions. So they are usually appointed on a semester basis or a term basis, and there really is. As such, there's no concept of job security in their line of work. They get appointed per semester based on the teaching requirements of the institute in question. So there's a lot of uncertainty about whether they will ever be anytime in the near future get the kind of teaching appointments they desire. So usually they are the first line of professionals that get axed in these situations. So there's a lot of job uncertainty for professors as well. And then of course for students there's uncertainty with regard to finances and with regard in the continuing education. Concerns about how they're going to fund their education once things go back to normal. Are they how they pay their fees and so on, but also concerns about education itself. Are they do they want to come back to regular campus education? Do they want to give themselves a break for a while, come back to it later? And then concerns about, especially for students who are at the cusp, where they are just at a point where they're ready to graduate and move on to something else. There's a lot of uncertainty for such people because they're concerned about, what job prospects are going to look like with the economy having taken such a hit. They don't know whether they'll get the kind of placements they want. Then those who are just coming out of high school and into college, there's a lot of uncertainty for them about what the admissions process is going to look like. So for students, there's that kind of concern. And then above all, there's a concern about the whole shift itself. Like ever since the lockdown, there has been a transition, a need to transition from classroom-based learning to online education. And there are concerns about how to do that shift. There's the regular classroom faculty have been used to in-person interaction with students. That's a certain mode of learning and a certain mode of communication. Per force, they were required because of this crisis to shift things online, and that then requires not just a technical transition. It also requires a sort of mental transition. You're now using you're approaching education in a very different context. And so that poses a challenge both for professors and students. For students, it's about learning through a new medium and, getting on board with the requirements of that new medium. For professors, it is about communicating their ideas effectively in a new medium because the context of the interaction has now changed. The kind of in-person, tactile, face-to-face communication they are used to is now changing for on both sides. So there are those difficulties, and of course the usual technical challenges one does face. So I'd say that at various different levels, whether it's the educational and the learning aspects, or the funding, the financial aspects, or the administrative aspects, or even ongoing research, like where is the seed money for research going to come from in future, and even people's researchers' ability to go out there and do the field work that they need to do, come back and do the lab work that supports the field work, translate all that into. There's a lot of uncertainty in all these areas. So I think eventually we will work out some sort of system and things will settle into some sort of quiescent state. But at the moment, there's it's unsettled. So it is causing in all areas. That's just a very short overview, and we can of course get into it.
Yeah. Yeah, Professor Valdiya, I see that it is impacting in so many ways, that whether it is the university admissions taking a hit, or the financial aspect, the aid that comes in any form through admissions or other funding sources is again getting a massive shock. The insecurity that is there with the temporary teaching staff and the way the campus life, the university teaching methods are going to change. How do you also see that the very way of teaching learning, as you mentioned, it has now become on an online platform, and it's not just about the technical shift, it's also the mental mindset change or the mental shift that has to come with it. How will teaching, learning, and even evaluation, if you were to think of assessments, how is that also going to get an impact? And what are some of the just basic insecurity that comes in students, that how are we going to assess for something we have learned a certain way?
That's a great question. And as you mentioned, one point that I didn't cover earlier was the evaluation aspect. So teaching is one part of it, but evaluating students, monitoring their progress, figuring out whether they're actually absorbing and absorbing what you're teaching. That evaluation process is a lot easier when you're doing it in person, and when you're doing it through the written medium, through written and spoken medium. It's much more difficult when you're requiring students to interface with you online. So regarding the online, the first thing I will say is that shift from classroom learning to online learning. Online learning actually has been, distance learning particularly, has been around for a while, actually, and it's an entire field of study in itself. And it has, over the years, they have come up with their own their theories, their pedagogical methods. It's actually an educational science in itself, and there's a reason why that happens. The reason is that, as I mentioned, the context of education in the online setting is different from the physical setting, because you are translating knowledge into a different context. So it's not a simple matter of just taking your classroom lectures, or you're just video recording your lectures in an empty room and then just posting them online, or just taking all the content that you would use, the textual material that you would use in your class, just digitizing it and putting it online. All that, we already have the means for doing all of that. It's been done. But shifting into an online format actually requires you to rethink education itself in a way that is meaningful to the learner. So because you're changing the context of the interaction, you have to devise ways and means of communicating that will make sense in a new medium. And because otherwise technological interfaces have an alienating tendency, right? I mean, human beings are social animals. They like to communicate face to face, in person. That mode of reaching out makes sense. And even your physical hand motions, your bodily motions, the body that you use when you're interacting with students, those who are used to classroom education, who are used to communicating in a classroom setting, they've worked out a certain way of communicating effectively. That same approach has to be relearned in the online format. You have to think of new ways to approach difficult subject matter that will make sense to students, given all the limitations of a technical interface. So that requires there's a certain learning curve in that. It takes a while for faculty who've never been used to that mode of communication to actually transition there. It's not a simple matter of just getting up to speed in a technical sense. And that is one of the reasons why you get some amount of resistance to that idea, especially from the more settled, the older faculty who are a little more used to a certain way of operating, right? I mean, I won't just break it down by age and generation. That's not fair. But there's a certain mindset change required for it that not everyone is comfortable with. There are those who resist it simply because they are apprehensive about that transition. And so for a long time, online education and technical education, remote learning, has not really been taken very seriously as a concept. There's a certain subset of people who do it for a living, but any kind of wholesale transition to that has not been thought of so far. Now, with the COVID crisis having visited this upon us per force, I think everyone's being required to take it on board seriously as a concept. So what's happening is that, of course, in the immediate aftermath of, the lockdowns and everything, people have had to be able to do it. I mean, there was no system, system by which it happened. Administrators usually had meetings with crisis meetings with faculty, and just gave them whatever bare bones knowledge they needed to make it happen, just so the continuity of education would not be disrupted. But the ongoing process in the future is going to be actually making the transition more seamless. I mean, right now they're just doing whatever they need to keep things going and to keep the students' education on keel, so that their future semesters and so on are not affected. They can at least complete some part of curriculum. And regarding evaluations, again, I think the general message we've been given across the board is to go easier on students, rather than requiring setting the same exacting standards that we had earlier for classroom learning. We are being required, at least in the short term, until things are worked out, until some sort of system is worked out. Professors in general are encouraging their students to work at their own pace, to communicate regularly with them in one-on-one sessions, so that if they have any problems, they let them know. And they're trying to be more accommodating of timelines of students' turnaround times on assignments and things like that. So of course they are being required to submit their assignments online, things like that. But we're giving them much more leeway as far as the time frames and the manner in they respond on assignments. Also, I think for many of us, though it would be nice to actually conduct a synchronous communication with students, where there's interaction, there's online interaction going on simultaneously with the group of students through Zoom calls and so on, Zoom meetings. That hasn't really worked out, from what I hear from faculty. That hasn't really worked out so well because of technical and various other challenges. So many of them have had to do have had to resort to asynchronous learning. That is where they post things online, which students then access at a later date, and respond on the basis of the classroom material that has been posted, which is not that kind of piecemeal way of doing it is not ideal. That's exactly what you want to avoid in online learning. That's because it's not just about transferring material online, but they're trying to work it out. So far, I think from what I hear, they've been managing somehow with some combination of meetings and asynchronous teaching.
Yeah.
But in the long term, they'll have to work out a system. I think it'll come with practice. It'll also require the faculty to actually get up to speed, to get trained on educational science and how that translates to an online platform. And for students also, there is an adjustment and learning curve. They too will have to get more comfortable with a new mode of communication. And in the long term, I think I see some sort of a system coming in where, as is often talked about in interviews, when you talk to educators, they'll all tell you some kind of blended learning, blended education come in, where there's a combination of classroom learning and online learning. But in general, I think faculty will have to learn to be more receptive of the concept of online learning, because there will be limitations hereafter that cannot be anticipated. And so some kinds of classes that don't require very physical modes of teaching, I think those kinds of classes could very well stay online permanently. So of course, it's too early to say yet.
Yeah, because from what I heard from another professor was that it requires a lot of work at the back end, and preparing for like detailed notes and presentations to be able to teach online. So how they are balancing that in terms of, earlier they would just go to a classroom and deliver a lecture. Now a lot of work at the back end has to be done so that they can take a class seamlessly online. So it's consuming a lot of their bandwidth, as you mentioned, that it might require a change in their approaches.
Right. Absolutely. It takes a lot more of your time, especially if you don't have a worked out system, and this is a concept you're new to. Then it's going to take a lot of background work, as this person mentioned, to shift your lectures online. You're going to have to post lectures, you're going to have to post slides. All of that takes more time than just walking into a class and delivering a lecture in the semester. That is very true. Yeah. And all of that is time that's unaccounted for, right? When you're actually being when you're paid, when you're being paid, there's a lot of those hours that you put in that aren't accounted for in the way you are compensated for your work as well. So yes, you end up taking twice as much time, or maybe even more, to deliver the same quality of education as you did previously.
We are still in the phase of dealing with so many changes and uncertainties, and it is probably that we rely on some more technological innovations to deal with the changes that are coming about even in higher education.